Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Correct. Good morning, my name is Dee Dee McEacher, and I am Director of the Licensing Division, and I have with me Chloe Whalen. She is the manager out of the section that is covering your program. So basically, I just want to tell you about how a license is going to move through our division, or the whole agency as a whole. The license application comes into our mailroom, it gets batched and sorted, and we usually get it the very next day in licensing. And then Chloe's team will pick that application up, get it processed, they'll make sure we have everything that we need, get criminal history background check started, and send it on its way. Our typical processing time for a license is brand new licenses are issued in less than 95% of them are issued in less than 7 days, and renewals are 99% renewals are issued in that time. So it moves very quickly through the process. After everything, all the requirements are met and the criminal history background check is passed, a license card will print and then we'll get it mailed out. Right now, we're mailing that out to the schools and course providers. We will talk about that in the rules later. Our typical model says we mail that out to the person who owns that license, which would be the instructor, because it's their responsibility to take care of it. Right now, the way the rules are working, that's not our process, but we'll talk about that throughout the day today. That's basically, it moves through very fast and very efficiently. There's really not a lot of downtime with it. One thing that we do that you probably haven't seen before is after we process a license application, it goes to imaging, which means we will have an electronic image of that so that anyone who calls up in the future or if someone in customer service needs to see that image of that application, or someone in enforcement needs to get it, there's not a time that we have to go physically pull files from a file cabinet. Everyone throughout the agency will be able to access that image. When it comes for renewals, you will get an email renewal notice at 90 days prior to expiration. 60 days prior to expiration, 45 days prior to expiration. If at 30 days they still have not renewed, they'll get a postcard and then another email renewal notice at 15 days if they still haven't renewed. So that'll be an efficiency improvement. That's basically, any questions on how a license application moves through? It's very fast. Yes.
Are the fees going to stay the same until we, I guess, look at it? Fees will all stay the same?
Yes, fees will stay the same. So what we do here at TDLR is we look at all the fees for each program on an individual basis once a year. So after it's been here for about a year and we see, is the program covering its cost? Then if we're bringing in more money than it needs to cover the cost, we'll lower the fees. If it's not, they'll go up. Typically, the program has shown that it's bringing in more money than you need, so it will probably be more than fees another year.
Dee Dee?
Yes.
Brian and I have had some discussions about possible reductions or removal of some fees as we do the initial review of the rules. It just depends on where we are on that, because what we want to do is standardize them to some of the fees that we have for issue and duplicate license, things of that type. But we're going to look at that early on to see what we can do to do some fee corrections as we go.
And Chloe is typically the person that will come before you for our licensing staff report, and I'm going to let her talk about your statistics so far this fiscal year since September.
Good morning, Chairman and board members, welcome. The report that Della will so graciously provided for you for our statistics tells you that the new and renewals that we issued from September 1st up until yesterday when we got our numbers. So if you have questions regarding those numbers, please let me know. We also issued the certificate orders that we are up to date on, as well as the parent top packets.
One of the things I want to talk to you about parent top packets, when the program came to us, there was a huge backlog of parent top packets that just hadn't quite made it from DPS and all the confusion and stuff. So when it got here, there were probably 5,000 or 6,000 of them waiting to be processed. One of the things that we do well is we spread those parent top packet orders out across my entire division of 50 people, and we knock those out in like 7 days. So when we get big influxes of work like that, we can spread it across a whole bunch of people and knock out big backlogs. So.
Excuse me, is that somewhere the total number of parent talks?
It was a handout that Della provided for.
No, that's not on your hand.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Oh, some parent talk, I'm sorry, no.
No, we don't have the total numbers of those yet, we can certainly get those for you. It's been well into the tens of thousands. Parent top packets can be ordered online now, and we will, certificate orders will be soon online as well. That should be that, they're almost through with that.
Mr. Ricardo Benavides, Chairman, I had a question. When is this gonna be implemented on the email to notify the renewal of licenses?
They are working on getting it done now, so it's just a matter of our programmers being able to make that happen.
Sure, and I apologize, you had mentioned that there would be an email sent 60 days prior, then again 45. What if an individual doesn't have an email?
Then we're gonna send out the postcard.
And the postcard will be sent 30 days, you mentioned, prior to.
That'll go out 60 days prior to. If we don't have an email address for them at all, it'll go out 60 days prior
Excellent,
to.
excellent, thank you so much. Because I figured, otherwise it would be late.
Right.
If they didn't get these. So-
Exactly, yeah, we don't want that.
So no email, and postcard at 60, that's
That's right.
excellent, fantastic.
Right, Mr. Chairman, the push that we have is to do that electronically to save postage costs, because, with the 660,000 plus licensees that we have, if we can eliminate 49 cents per licensee, it starts, amounting to quite a bit of money. So as much as we can do to put electronically, where we can reach out, touch somebody, and save that postage, the better. But we do understand that we have to recognize the different ways that people want to receive information. And that's why we have that, vision to go back to postcard if we're not being.
Absolutely. We'll encourage everyone to get an email
Yes.
as soon as possible. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, you touched on one of the issues that we're gonna explore as we get into the rules. The concept that somebody's late because they didn't start 30 days before the expiration. It is dated and it does not fit well in a technology world. The fact that the law says that a person has to hand deliver or have it postmarked 30 days prior to the expiration date doesn't make sense. And so we're gonna talk about ways of being smarter in light of that standard provision. I mean, think about the folly of if somebody does renew on that 59th day electronically, we get it all set up, they do it electronically. By law and rule, they're still required to hand deliver and postmark something to us within 30 days. Doesn't make sense. And we would be foolish to take any type of action against somebody who has already consummated the renewal. So we've got some clever ways that we're gonna have the board, we look at maybe considering that to mitigate the TDLR going after somebody in a situation we don't really care to.
Thank you.
This is Carlos Reyna. That actually stems from back in the DPS days when they licensed us, because everything was done that way, so they
Yeah.
required the 30-day.
Well, I do default to DPS, they have guns, it's one of my standards. They typically get their way with me.
But it wasn't so far back that people were driving horses instead of vehicles.
We just got that stuff.
Ma'am, Glenn Whittingham, I'm sorry if I missed it, but are the emails going to go to solely the instructors or the instructors and the course providers get
Well,
copied?
that's part of those rule changes we need to discuss. Our current model says it goes to the person who owns that license. So it would go to the instructor. Right now, it's not set up that way, which is another reason we haven't set up emails yet. So that's part of the rule changes we need to talk about as we go forward throughout the day.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Dee Dee.
You're welcome.
Very good. Okay, moving right along, I think we are in item H, discussion, are we ready for that?
May I
Once again.
interrupt? May I interrupt for just 1
Absolutely.
second? And maybe this is the question I should have asked. Because there's one of the handouts we were giving out shows the TDLR programs and license types, and then they're all numbered. And it's a list of all the categories of licenses. And there's 2 missing from the driver education and safety list, and that's course providers and specialized course provider licenses. Those are missing. The driving safety schools are there, but the course provider licenses are not.
Okay.
Did I take care? I'm surprised that we missed one off the list of 3,055 licenses.
What's that?
Dropping the ball.
Man.
They're bad.
I'm looking at them together. You're gonna see a lot of them.
I'm not sure if they're.
Good morning again. Della Lindquist, Deputy General Counsel. I'm here to present the rules and the rulemaking process for you. Just briefly, I know Mr. Rayner was talking about how this program has been moved around a lot from different agencies or different places and locations. It is always stressful to move. And I know that because I'm going through that right now. Bought a house, sold a house, don't know where any of your stuff is. But one of the positives about moving, as you're gonna see today, hopefully and throughout this process, is you get to look at all your stuff again and decide if it's really needed, does it fit, does it work, and do I want it anymore, and why did I ever maybe buy it? So that's kind of the way I'd like to approach these rules as we talk today and as we get into the rulemaking process, perhaps with work groups, whatever the chair wants to do with all of this. I'll just kind of give you a broad overview of how we got to what you're looking at today, and then we can take it from there. Back in this summer, when we realized the bill had passed and all the different driving safety, driver education, the whole training program, plus the parent talk component, plus the public school component, which were all in different statutes and different rule sets, we're all going to come under one umbrella, so to speak. We were trying to conceptualize how that should be done. And as Bill spoke before, traditionally our rulemaking model in most of our programs, every definition is in .10 of whatever section, and every fee is in .80 in this event. We will try to get there with this set of rules, but if you were looking around for a .80, when he was talking earlier, it's not there yet, so don't panic. What I did, the method to our madness today, was to bring the rules as close to what you're used to looking at as possible, but beginning to morph them into our model, which would have all the definitions in one area, all the fees in one area, and the licensing kind of in one area. As far as we got, because we wanted you to at least be familiar with what you're looking at, because you're used to looking at your own particular component that was in the old 176 AABB, CCDD, and then the parent taught, and then the whole other thing on the public school. We have broken them into subsections. And some of our rules, like our boiler program, have these different kind of subsections, which is a little more appropriate when you have these very distinct kind of license types and license requirements. As we go through the rules, we will see, as Brian and Bill both spoke about, there's probably more in common with what's going on than not, but not all of you are used to seeing that because you're probably used to working in your own areas. I in no way am an expert on what the rules say or what they mean. That's why I have our team here, Kathy and Gay and Carrie, when we start talking about the parent talk, can probably answer those technical questions. I'm here as a guide to make sure that the rules are drafted, the legal component is met, they're in a format that is workable, and they're efficient, and that we use the correct text, that we stick to the statute, and we get them filed and in the most efficient way possible with the comment. So obviously the technical questions about why this is here or what it means, I will defer to the compliance team here. Each of you has been given a copy of the rules in the format they're in now, and it says guide, kind of this guide page. And I have a little exercise I'd like you to do right now with me, because a couple things have changed. If you have either a pen and paper or you're looking at it online, a couple of the page numbers have changed, and I apologize. Maybe in the formatting of the rules, they moved to another page. So are you looking at the advisory committee guide to driver education and safety rules? Does everybody see that?
What page is that?
I don't have it online, I'm sorry, with me, I just have the hard copy. But it's, should have been sent to you with the rules. I can get you a copy if you need that. Do we need to make copies?
There's actually some.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Who needs one?
what we're gonna do is, I think it'll help you locate things once we start kind of flipping through the rules. Where you see kind of in the middle of the page where it says subchapter, subchapter A, page 1R, you can make a notation, that is that subsection is called authority. So when you start talking about the authority for the rules, will be found there. Subchapter B, page 1R also, definitions. Subchapter C, page 5R, driver education schools. Subchapter D, page 41R, driving safety and course providing. And then we're gonna make a change. Subchapter E is actually on page 80R, and that's the drug and alcohol driving awareness program, page 80 instead of 79. Subchapter F, the parent talk program, is on page 100. Subchapter G is actually on page 102R, public schools, the POI. Subchapter H on page 109 is the advisory committee rules. Subchapter I on page 109R are the fees. And last but not least, subchapter J on page 112 is the enforcement section. I apologize for the change, but you guys are in the instruction business. Sometimes when you write it down, you kind of understand it more. Or at least the history involved.
Just to clarify, the
Yeah.
109R is both advisory commission rules and fees.
No, I'm sorry, subchapter H, H is in Carrie. 109, committee, that's the advisory committee rules. Subchapter I, well, it's also on page 109, that's the fees begin.
But it's subchapter I.
And then subchapter J, page 112 is enforcement.
Mr. Chairman, before Della gets in there and makes you guys do some more math and moving numbers around, you want to proceed and get maybe a good hour under our belt, break for lunch, and then come back?
Absolutely.
It's kind of just, and that way we can just give the board a little bit of a break, or the committee a little bit of a break, because you guys have been already getting a lot of information coming at you. But what we'll probably do, Della, is probably work through, maybe the definition is probably 84, 110, somewhere down there. Just get a sense of how we're moving. But it's just to give you guys an idea of how things are gonna flow the conversation. It's wide open. These things are, this is a full contact sport at this point. We expect you guys to weigh in and have the dialogue, let folks hear. The other thing, Mr. Chairman, I just want you to give some thought to, is that we did call earlier for the public comment. There was no one signed up, but there may be value in having public comment after you guys have had their dialogue, because now they may know what to talk about and ask you about. So that's something that you may want to consider at the point when we get.
Thank you very much for providing.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I think generally, I'll just give you kind of an overview of what you're looking at. Again, we broke it out into the different subsections, which is getting closer to our model. Obviously, bringing in different rules based on different statutes was a little challenging because we're governed by different agencies and have different terminologies and that kind of thing. So just bear in mind that this is probably not what the rules are going to look like in the end. But this was designed to help you find the sections that you're used to looking at and seeing how we're all trying to fit it together while trying to get to our model of putting things together, like all the fees in one area and all the definitions in one area. We're starting with definitions. They're on page 1. There was a lot of definitions that looked similar for the different programs, like driver education and driving safety and the alcohol awareness, but with very subtle changes, maybe in the clock hours, or maybe in some terminology like that. So that's why we left them all separate and put them in little sections. And globally, we replaced, we took out references to the commissioner, any references to TEA. We did that throughout the rules. We added in the department, which is TDLR, the commission. I will add in the advisory board. I'm not sure if I put that in right now, but that will go in the advisory committee definition. And things like that. There were some other definitions that we took out, not because they're not important terms, such as deferred adjudication, good reputation, we changed that up, inactive status. Again, there's a method to our madness. It's either something that we already have a definition for, or we didn't see the need for it there because it's defined in another place. If you believe something should be put back in, or it's something sacred that everybody needs, of course you can talk to me about that. But I can proceed through these definitions any way you'd like me to, Mr. Chairman. Go through each one, or if you have, what did you do, why did you take this out, I'm happy to do whatever you'd like me to do.
No, thank you so much. I don't think that's necessary. What I'd like to do is just go right through it. Actually, I'm not sure if it's an opportune time to mention this, but I wanted to get together and develop some small little work groups so that we could literally just go line by line, because this is important to the industry. As opposed to reading every single definition right now. There's really no time. I do want to remind everybody that there is nothing official that's going to be done today, correct?
Yeah.
There are no rules, so I would like the board members to actually take our time to go through each one of these lines, and if we deem it necessary, then of course we can talk about that obviously in the next meeting. But no, we could just breeze right through them, unless of course there's somebody that would like to.
Well, this is Carlos Reina. I thought maybe we could go section by section, and if there's something we have questions about, we can ask it at that time.
What I can do now, in the hour more or less that we have, is go subsection by subsection and kind of tell you what the bigger things that I've done, that we've done to change it, and then you can bring up any issues that you have about that subsection before break for lunch, if you'd like for me to do that. Like I'm doing now with definitions, I can just say kind of some of the bigger, maybe more substantive things that you might see.
Exactly, a brief overview, and if we do have any questions, obviously, more than welcome to.
Mr. Chairman, I'll interject here as well. Mr. Randy, you said something earlier when you were talking about the history, which I found very fascinating, is you were saying that when the program went to TEA, there were some proprietary school elements that were fused into the rules that really don't apply to the industry. We're definitely going to want to know what those are, so as we're going through, if you can highlight and say that was a proprietary piece, that's going to help whatever work groups the chairman puts together, because it's going to give guidance, general guidance and direction, things for people to consider.
Okay.
Thank you.
In the definitions portion, I'd say one of the bigger changes you might see is the definition of good reputation. That is still in the statute as a requirement to get one of the licenses, or several different licenses. But the way it was defined before, we either take care of it in different ways with our normal application process, or we didn't see a way of enforcing it. So we have redefined that. A person is considered to be of good reputation if the department determines that the person has the honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity to hold a license issued by the department based on the person's responses to the application for license and pursuant to 51-4012A Occupations Code and this chapter. Basically, when we looked at all those A through G for all the good reputations throughout the different programs, basically what you were saying was something that we were already doing through our normal application process. We look at everybody's criminal background, we will look at when enforcement develops the penalty matrix and the criminal guidelines for offenses that relate to being one of these licensees, relate to the occupation. We will look at all of those types of offenses and say, you know, if you've been convicted of this or placed on deferred adjudication for this, you may not qualify for the license. So we believe that we have taken every consideration in A through G and not tossed it out, but we have tried to marry it with processes that we were always doing to achieve the same outcome. But I'd say, of all the definitions right now, that's probably the biggest change that you might see. But we didn't want you to think, oh, it doesn't matter if they have a felony, or it doesn't matter. It will be taken care of through what you'll get used to seeing is in our normal process. But certainly, as we go, if we do break into work groups, nothing's written in stone forever, and that can change. But this was what we came up with to try to let you know that our Chapter 51, which is our enabling statute, has a lot of enforcement minutia in there about what we do and our process and stuff like that. So we will refer you to that chapter in this document, you'll see, but we don't want to repeat everything that's in Chapter 51 every time. So we certainly respect the fact that there are certain criminal offenses and honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity issues that would affect someone getting a license. We still think they're very important, but we felt like we had it covered in our normal process.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Francis, what we're asking the board to do is sometimes one of the most challenging things to do. It is easy to look at words on a page and try to edit within the lines. Oh, I'm gonna edit here, take that line out. But we really want you to think in terms of the blank page. We want you to think in terms of what can the rules be versus what are they now. If you work within the confines of what they are now, you're gonna have those really horrible sentences that started with someone else authoring it, and then Kevin knows exactly what I'm talking about when they do the ordinances, and it ends up with somebody else writing a paragraph that makes no sense. So look at what you have now, but when you look at a rule or a definition, think about what has been the thing that's been most troublesome to your industry. Get rid of it. How do you improve it? Or how would you reinvent it from scratch? So don't just be stuck with the words in front of you. Vision what can be versus what is in front of you now. That's a hard thing to do, but if you look at every word from the standpoint of, well, that's always been ridiculous. I would rewrite it from scratch to read this one versus, oh, I take this word out and dot the T there. If it's bad, how would you put it in place fresh?
Carlos Reyna, I have a question. Since I'm not really familiar with the occupations code, would it be possible for us to get a copy of what those prohibitions are or conditions are to see what's being replaced? In other words, you know, we've always had the 7-year violation for DWI can't be licensed. Is something similar to that in the occupations code? Is it the same timeline? Is it less?
Well, actually, we have Chapter 51 of the Occupations Code, and we have Chapter 53 of the Occupations Code that specifically deals with how to handle a criminal offense. We have certain specific the law in 51. So certainly you can get that. We can make that available to you. It's on our website too.
We've included as a reference the material that you have today. You can scroll down and see Chapter 51.
But basically 51, again, is our overarching enabling statute and sets out maybe some specific, under certain circumstances, we can deny or revoke a license. It doesn't go into specific types of offenses. We leave that up to program chapter statute. They have certain specific offenses that you can't get a license for, as Christina mentioned. And then Chapter 53 is a special statute that deals specifically with criminal offenses for licensing agencies and how to put those offenses through a matrix and basically determine if they fit, even though this person has the offense, is he still fit for licensure? Is he rehabilitated? What kind of efforts has he made to redeem himself? References from law enforcement, how serious was the crime, how long ago, and that kind of thing. So we rely on those statutes, and we'll get you familiar with those.
Ricardo Benavides, Chair. Actually, Carlos' question, I think, was, is there like a list, we get people that say, hey, I wanna become an instructor, or I wanna be a driver's ed instructor. Is there like a list that where we can vet them and say, you know what, if you have, a felony, you can't be an instructor, don't even try. But we've always had the 7 year, if you have a PWI within the last past 7 years, you can't. You mentioned section 51 specifically, what page would that be? I'm just curious, it would be nice to have like a document we could look at.
Right, and I apologize, I don't know what page. I know that in 1001 Education Code, which is the law that governs all of this now, there are certain criminal offenses that will keep you from getting a license.
So that information is here.
That's in your law, and you should have that. For instructors, basically a lot of it would be the sexual offenses, that kind of thing. I don't know them exactly offhand, but those haven't changed.
Excellent.
Those haven't changed since the law was, amended to bring the program into being.
Thank you so much.
And we can certainly, as we delve into it deeper and see if the 7 year is there. But I think probably if it's not in a statute, we would have taken that out of the rule, because there's no limitation in 51 or 53 on the number of years. It kind of all depends on if it's an offense that relates to the occupation, how long ago was it? There's no absolute clause on the year. It takes into consideration how this person may have rehabilitated themselves, or taken some action, how long ago was it, how old were they, those kind of things.
Absolutely.
So I don't recall in the statute, and I haven't memorized it, but I need to look, but I don't recall there being anything in there about a special time frame. I do know there's certain classifications of offenses that would keep you from getting a license, or that we're required to revoke or deny a license.
So I will interject, Brian Francis, there was a time period of 30 years committed for those sexual offenses, but not related to any driver-related offenses. That's something that's been infused into the rules, and again, that's still here for discussion. Let me just reiterate, even when Della says it includes the change of, this is a pre-proposal, so, just start kind of get your mind around it. It's just a conversation. Man, I need to put that back in, that's important to us, and we can work with that, so this is just a start.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Not as safe, just a background on that, and moved to Texas Education Agency in '89. This provision was placed in there. Public school teachers has a 10-year status for an alcohol-related offense, and our industry negotiated it down to 7, but it comes from the public school side once we made that transfer in '89. So we can look at it, certainly see what we want to do.
It's good history, thank you very much.
Unless there's any further questions on the overview of the definitions, I can move on to the minimum standards for
Carlos
operating.
Reina, one just short question. I noticed you took out government record and struck through. That's always been kind of one of the no-nos, or if you weren't charged for doing something with government record. Does that mean the certificate is no longer considered a government record?
I believe we took that out because to us it's obvious that it's a government record. There's so many other things that are government records. If we identify that as a government record, it means certain things are not. It's very broad what is a government record, because we're considering the Public Information Act and all of that, and so most everything in here might be a government record. So looking at those definitions in light of all the other definitions, it seemed like it stood out to us that why were those particular things identified as government records, but maybe not the other things. So, I understand there's going to be reasons why you've identified things over the years to make sure that everybody knew it was a government record, but in our world, everything is a government record, every document is a government record, potentially. And I will also defer to my colleagues up here if they want to point out some things in subchapter C to do with the operation of the licensed Texas driver education schools. If they see something that was pretty substantive that we've changed.
Excuse me, can I ask a question about the definitions?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't put that in there. Will someone look at the numbering? Cause I don't wanna bring up stuff that somebody's already gonna review before it goes to the Texas Register.
Oh,
Because
yes.
you've got 2 9s.
The numbering is very, it's, because we knew it was all gonna change, so, it's not in a perfect shape.
And also, will someone also do a look at, because in the section 2, under driving safety and course providers, Texas Education Agency is still listed.
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll take all of them.
This is Brian Prince, we'll find and we'll look to the group to help us, but we'll find those references where it says division, and it still should be department,
Yeah,
where it says TEA, it should be department, or in some of those cases, it may be executive director and the department, or executive director and the commission, depending on the authority that's being referenced. And we'll do our best to find those. Remember, we're looking at maybe going to Texas Register somewhere in March. So we've got a lot of work in between the refinement.
Yeah, I just, that's cool, so I don't want to bring that up if y'all are gonna have it, so. But I will say that in the driving safety, you still list the uniform certificate of course, completion, number 18 in that definition, you left, it is a government record. So there's no.
Be consistent there.
Okay, so on page 5, we start with the subchapter C, minimum standards for operation of licensed Texas driver education schools. Okay, Kathy, as we go through this, if you see something that in your world is different or why we took it out, I see on page 9 where it says school directors, assistant directors, and administrative staff members. A lot of that was taken out of the statute. We're not going to, from what I understand, issue licenses to the support personnel in the schools.
By law, not by choice, it's statutorily.
I have a question on page 6, Nina Saint. On E1. You struck out partnership or corporation.
In our world, that a person includes all of that in chapter 51.
Another global change that we're looking at making, this is gonna be something we're gonna bounce off the board. There are a variety of different dates. You must tell us in 5 days. You must let us know in 7 days. It's 30 days for this thing, and it's 10 days for that thing. We wanna bring those to a uniform level. Most of the time in our world, it's 10 days. I do recognize that the statute has a few, that says 5 days, and we'll have to obviously defer to that. But you may see us try to push something to 10 days, and if it's a name change, probably put it at 30 days, and that matches across the board how we do business. That's only gonna allow us to be more efficient as opposed to having to wear different hats for different things.
And absolutely stay away from business days. All that does is create confusion because you don't know whether this skeleton crew day for Texas is a business day or a holiday. Or is this year where Christmas falls on the weekend or during the week. So by just having days, it's easy to count always. It's always easy to set up a computer program for days.
And as we go through, you'll see some notes and questions kind of to myself, or what we will, when we kind of drill down and get into the work groups. I'm not asking necessarily for the answers to those today, but it's just kind of a guide. Ryan and I were looking through the rules and we made notes to ourselves, so, to ask the group or when we get real specific on the rules. So you'll see some of those throughout. One of the bigger changes on page 13R.
Mr. Chairman, and no, I'm sorry, on page 6, you're gonna see some across the board terminology change. When you look at 84.105, in that first line where it says, be made on the form supplied by, you're gonna see us change a lot of that to prescribed by. So we can put it on the webpage. It's come to my attention that there are some forms that we do not put on the webpage, and somebody has to request it to get a copy of it. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna put all the forms up there, and you download them, and don't call us, and don't ask for it. If you gotta do it, if it comes in, if it's right, we're gonna be happy. If it's wrong, we're gonna tell you it's wrong. the supply by the facility for residents.
Okay, on page 13R, this speaks to what I was talking about before in little letter P. The commission or executive director may suspend, revoke, or deny a license to any driver education instructor under any one of the following circumstances. All of this was taken out beginning on the bottom of page 13 up to the top of page 14, because again, we have a lot of that in chapter 51. When we get to our enforcement section and these rules at the very end, we refer you to chapter 51 that talks about when the executive director or the commission may suspend, deny, or revoke a license. So we felt this was just repetitive. But again, when you read through it and when we get in our workbook, you feel like something is taken out that shouldn't have been, please bring it up to us. But we're just showing you kind of our methodology. So,
Pat Bar,
yes.
just a point of clarification, then, if the license is revoked, then the person would have to be responsible for going to chapter 51 to understand the laws that are surrounding that issue?
We will give what's called a notice of alleged violation to someone far in advance before any license is revoked, and give them an opportunity to read what the violations are against them, and they have an opportunity to settle the matter, ask for a hearing, and in that notice of alleged violation, it explains very detailed the jurisdiction, what's the section of chapter 51 they're alleged to have violated. All that stuff is on our website. We can get in, if they want to read it, but we will describe the facts as we believe them to be true, and the specific violation, and the text of that violation that says, you did this, and this statute says you shall not do that. So that's how people should know, what has been alleged against them. So they have a lot of opportunity to discuss with the enforcement division, show that perhaps it wasn't them, or they didn't do it, or ask for a hearing, or something.
Thank you very much.
And Ms. Mark, this is Ron Benson. It's a great question, because normally when you see the chapter 51 references in this body of rules, it's pretty much saying, we've got the authority to do what's in the statute. And so it's a pass-through. Bill's authority is in chapter 51 per se, but the violations of the practitioner are gonna reside in the rules that's in front of it. It's not gonna be a violation necessarily of chapter 51. It's an exercise of authority under chapter 51, because you violated something in 84, or you violated something in 1001 Texas education.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, that's a great question.
9 on page 7, I'm sorry. I think it's,
We're sorry, we're on the 13 hours, we good?
I know. Okay. G2 describes a renewal fee for, I think this is instructors.
Yes?
Okay, school license, all right. Okay, I'm gonna skip that one, thank you.
Did you have a question?
I think it was more on the instructor renewal, but I'll look at that.
We took out annual because it can only, it's every year, the statute says they are 1 year.
Okay, and for clarification, would be this time if we wanted to suggest something that was not changed already?
It'd be great to hear it,
Can
absolutely.
we bring that up, or is this inappropriate?
It's very important.
On, page 8, under 103B6,
B as in boy?
yes, B is
Okay.
important, thank you. It reads, 6, would ensure that no instructor provides more than 8 hours behind the wheel instruction per day. I would like to make a suggestion to change that to 10 hours per day. Originally, it was 6. When we went to the Texas Education Agency, and it was moved to 8, like pulling and tugging and several items. But there's no background for either the 6 or the 8, although we can look at truck drivers in the commercial, the CDL industry, that they have the 10 hours on and 10 hours off, or 12 hours off, or whatever that reads. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Mr. Chairman, what we'll do is, when we move to the work groups, and those segment of rules are given to whichever groups you assign, that proposal for, the rule as it stands is 8 is what it is now, and the proposal, the discussion point for the 10 will be included in that information. So that work group will have the full benefit of the recommendation of the state.
Okay, on page, I'm moving kind of fast because I didn't see any really local large changes right now that were made to the rest of that section. But on page 36R, I'll just give you an example of how we combine and try to become more efficient. At the top of page 36R, actually it starts on the bottom of page 35. Instructional design. We combine B, we put B up in 7. And then instead of starting the beginning of each sentence on page 36 at the top with the word include, you just put include one time, just kind of streamline things. So that's an example when you see stuff struck through, it's not really substantive changes, it's just a little more efficient, less words. Or he has 100 and some odd pages, so anything, any twos we can save, we try to do that.
I'm saying, I'm gonna try to go through all of them up to where we are now, but on page 14R, we struck number 6. The applicant or licensee has a personal driving record showing the person has accumulated 6 or more penalty points. Was that struck because it's a repeating statute?
I believe it was struck because it was taken out of the statute. Am I? Yeah. There was something that was taken out of the statute as far as an instructor that was kind of surprising, and I think that was it. We can double check.
Okay.
This is the instructor.
I know there were bills to do away with the driver responsibility program, and how it reads is that they follow the driver responsibility program.
I will have an
Those
answer
bills
for you.
didn't pass.
I can get that answer for you during the break and answer.
Thank you.
Okay, it was. It was old 1001.257, which was repealed.
Okay. On page 15R, K, the second sentence there, a school shall not enroll more than 36 students excluding makeup students, and the number of students may not exceed the number of seats and tables or desks available to the school. That was struck. Is there a reason behind that being struck?
I don't believe that number 36 was in the statute.
Correct.
So we were trying to explore why it was limited to 36. I think.
Okay.
So as we
So
get
is
to
it
the.
further discussion?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it's a teacher-student ratio.
Okay.
When you go to.
It could be,
This is Brian Francis. When you look at 12R, my 12R, and I know there's some differences. And I'm looking at letter K. You have anyone
not yet. I've lost my pages.
there? I think I've got it. Let me find it. So it's 84.106, letter K.
What is it reading?
It reads, take precedent. It reads, each student, including makeup students, shall be provided their own seat table.
I'm sorry, I got a little bit of this chair. Brian, we actually do not have the document that was forwarded to us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
You know, I just
You look
figured,
like you-
We were provided a document that strikes what's out. That's not the document that we have. But,
Yeah.
and I think that's one of the reasons why we're having a problem. I just thought, I just figured, and I apologize. We actually do
I
not
think
have
this would be a
that.
great time to break the lunch.
You're not cheating off of somebody else.
Here's the point that I am disappointed that the board just now had the.
thought, I'll catch y'all here. We have the document, we just don't have what was provided
Brian,
originally.
this is Carlos Rainey. You said you
You
were
had
gonna guide
yours.
us. You said you were gonna guide us through this whole thing. We trusted you as a senior hat.
Oh, you got paper?
There was
Can you pass it down?
Well, they sent a second one.
Okay, so this is what we'll do, Mr. Chair. We'll definitely, this will be a great time to break for lunch. We'll make sure that we have copies of that one, sitting in front of you, so we can follow through. That is.
I was just making all this up down here, y'all.
I move that the, lunch. How much time do you think?
Usually, people try to do 1 hour, but I think it's about 1 hour and 10 minutes works the best with traffic and finding restaurants and that sort of thing.
Perfect. I have a glare on there. What time is it? Is it 11:45?
11:45.
Let's be back here at, what?
1 sounds great.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are back in session. Good afternoon, Adela. I think, unless of course the board members would like to, I think we'd be all right just to start from where you were at, as opposed to
Where you-
going all the way back to the beginning. Is anybody, is that okay? Just right where you, go ahead.
If you don't mind, Chair, Kevin, I'd like to go back to one of Dinah's suggestions about the 10-hour.
Excellent. So if you could, Ricardo Benavides, Chair, if we could just touch on that and then go right where you left off, Del. If you don't mind, just let us know where we're at so that we could, what page?
I need to find a page. You're in what we're saying,
I'm moving.
Page 7.
page 8R, okay? 84, section 84.103, 6, D6. So you wanted to discuss that rule? Or the change?
I just wanted to hear it again. I was so focused on trying to find this.
Oh. What she had suggested is to replace 8 with 10.
Nana, would you mind telling us why? I mean, what are the thoughts behind that?
Well, there's no statutory direction, and as I said, once we moved to TEA, they had 6. And we did get it to 8 at that point, before the State Board of Education. But there's no why 8. So the only thing I can relate to is the CDL. The truck drivers have a 10-hour rule. And so, in the essence of shortage of instructors and backlog of hours, if our current instructors could work 10, may help some of the load, especially going into the fall out of the summer. These are my thoughts on that.
Carlos. I didn't mean to interrupt. Carlos Raina. I just wanted to give a little historical perspective to this. A lot of the rules that we have for driver education actually came from public driver ed, which were limited with regards to the number of hours and how the scheduling worked, how they work out a group of kids to make it work out over a 6-period time, summer sessions. And those have been imposed on us, not saying because we were competitors, but that's what took place a lot. And so a lot of these rules that we'll be reviewing and suggesting changes is because there's a difference between the two industries. But we were being held to their standards, and we shouldn't be.
Kevin, I definitely encourage all of the people that are present today to let us know your vision on that, because some of us aren't in that area, and so I'd really like to hear from some of the people that are really affects.
Mr. Chairman, Brian Francis, Mr. Knapp, as we move forward, again, I imagine that the first draft that will go to the text register will probably happen in February. And there's gonna be an opportunity to have some very rigorous discussion. This is one of those elements that, does change the scope of practice. It's more of a significant change than a rearranging. So it's gonna be worthwhile to have the discussion, but where the Saints coming from, I definitely understand that you're saying there's science, or at least some type of research behind the 10-hour. But people are gonna be concerned, obviously, about the safety of the folks that are riding with it, but there'll be an opportunity to have a lot of discussion this week, so we'll make sure we highlight that particular change and doesn't get lost in a lot of documents. That's great, Scott.
And, Nina's saying, some of the individuals I've spoke to, not on the committee, but in the industry, I will maybe specify that.
I'm looking at that frame.
Also suggested, if it did move to 10, to have a break. Have at least a 30-minute break somewhere within that, so it wasn't a continuous 10.
Mr. Chairman, I think I started the concern about not having the same document, so now I will reference, the one that I think everyone has, and it's on page 12-R. Letter K. Now we all know where I'm at. This is good. You're gonna hear us say this over and over. We're not experts in this area, but we are experts in looking at rules, we're experts in licensing, enforcing, and those sort of things.
I think it's 13. Way to confuse us again.
Okay, well, I'm okay with that. Mine's on 12, yours is on 13.
We're good.
We're still in the same place.
What is yours read?
Mine reads, let me lay out my thought process first there. We're gonna be reading these things with fresh eyes. You guys have been doing this for years and may not have gone back to your rules in a while. And so we're gonna look at what the words say. Here's what this section says. They'll know that this is what it means. This section says that a school shall not enroll more than 36 students. Student makeup.
That's
We're
not.
not there.
We're not there. That was.
Where are we at?
And 15 more.
I just got some new glasses about 2 weeks ago. You tell me these darn things don't work.
We stopped on page 15R.
Okay, so everyone's on that letter K?
Yes.
All right, that's the one we're talking about.
Yes. And my question was,
So my statement is
okay,
that language now says the school to not enroll more than 36, right? And we talked about the ratio. Normally in rules and statutes for other programs, there is a school requirement, which is the entire building, and there's a classroom instructor to student ratio. The way this language reads, and this is something we're gonna work on, it looks like the whole school can. I'm imagining it really means that you gotta have one instructor per 36 students. You can have 5 different classrooms that accommodate that.
And, Kevin, or if you're talking online AMI,
It's
you could have
50
literally,
Yeah.
I mean, the way it states right now, it's one student per class, basically, and you can have as many classes as you want.
Yeah. So
Which is cumbersome, but.
it's cumbersome, and we're gonna look at that, but what I want to impress upon the board, when you're going through the rules, words mean what they mean. If you put classroom in the line above, when you put school in the line after that, there's a difference. The school is a whole entity, the classroom is that little room, so just be aware as you're reading through it, don't gloss over and say, okay, well, the school can only enroll 3, and it's the 36 to 1 instructor. Look at where you mean classroom, you mean classroom. When you mean the whole school, you mean the whole school. I'm just putting that in there, you read it that closely and that finely when you're going through it.
Pat, Laura, so then, therefore, in the definition, we should have a definition of school and a definition of classroom.
That would
And so,
definitely help.
in that way, when it is printed, then the reader can go back to its definition.
It means the same thing where it's supposed to mean the same thing. And you guys are gonna have some work there.
Yeah, so, I think there's 3 definitions then, there's a school, there's a classroom, and there's an online.
Correct.
Because none of those mean, if we could combine classroom and online to mean the same thing, but I don't think we can.
I don't think you can either. And that's why you're always gonna hear me say, "We've got some work to do. We've got some work to do. Where they need to be the same, make sure that they're the same. When they need to be different, now let's use the different terminology to articulate that."
Pat, Laura, if you go back up to D.
On page 29?
On-
I'm joking, I'm joking. I'm joking, I'm sorry.
Yeah, your 9 is minus 4, 15. Okay, if you go back up to D, it indicates that a class can be no more than 36
That's
students.
exactly right. And when you look at D, where we use the word class, and then you go down to K, where they use the word school, that's what we call good old fashioned inconsistency in the rules. And so those are the things that we're gonna charge you guys with, is looking at the rules and making sure the words say precisely what we mean. That's a great catch. And when I have my little goofy notes, I've got a circle up here on 35, 36 for class. And then when I went down later on, I was like, whoa, it's 36 per school. That means something completely different down there. I know it's not intended to, but it does in writing. I'm gonna push you guys hard on creating consistency in your rules. Have them say what you mean, have them say what you want them to say versus what you think they should say.
Pat, Laura, just a point of clarification. Since K is striked out, so are we to understand that it should be in and not striked out, that whole sentence?
You're gonna have the opportunity to go through all of them, even the ones that we proposed to strike out in this conversation. You can say, no, that needs to stay in, that needs to come back in, so you're gonna have that opportunity. This is a starting point for a conversation, but not a starting point for your decisions.
9 is saying, I'd like to make a comment on D, and as it does not relate to K, because D is, driver education schools that desire to instruct students age 14 and over shall provide the same beginning and ending dates for each student in the same class of 36 or less. What if I have 37?
Well, and what we're gonna say is, ask you, what if you have 37?
Right.
You've been in the industry a little bit longer than us, how would you treat it?
Well, if you strike K, or a version which relates to a class, an instructor ratio, D does not define the number of students, the teacher-student ratio.
Okay.
It just says you have to have beginning and ending dates for a class of 36 or less. So if I have 37, it doesn't restrict me from having 37, but then I don't have to have beginning and ending dates.
That is definitely one way you can read that.
Okay.
And I love that you point that out, because at the end of the day, when you bring in, Dell, no offense, but when you bring in our legal brethren and sisters into a hearing, this is what the lawyers joust over, is the inconsistency in the language. And inconsistencies create gaps, and it creates opportunity for people who should be held accountable to have a loophole for not being held accountable. I'm a nerd, I'm getting excited over this, because I see you guys, you're leaning in because you're understanding that you're not here just to move rules into a place, but you're here to make them read with sense and read consistently across the board.
Okay, Kevin, now, am I to understand, Brian, that what our goal is to try to bring all 3 of the divisions together in one? Or are we still gonna differentiate between classroom courses and online courses and whatnot? Because in here, it differentiates. I mean, here are the rules for online, here are the rules for classroom. We're still gonna do that, or are we trying to consolidate, move it all together?
Brian Francis, Mr. Napper, you a sports fan?
Yes.
Football?
Yes.
So the goal is to win the game.
Yes.
And we may design our game plan to run the ball when we realize we can tear them up with the pass midway through the game. If you guys determine that we need to adjust that goal, the goal is to bring them together, to make them uniform where they should be, different where they have to be. But if you guys come back to us and say, well, it's not gonna work, there's too many differences here, you're not gonna hear us scream and say, well, y'all gotta go back to TEA, cause y'all don't wanna line this stuff up. We're not gonna say that. So you guys are gonna help us drive this thing, but I want us to start with an ambitious goal, and if it doesn't work, we're gonna adjust, and we're gonna work with you guys.
Well, I'm not opposed, I'm just
Yeah,
wondering.
no, I really. Thank you, man. Woo, it's exciting times.
Okay, any more questions? we'll continue now. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Della Lindquist, Deputy General Counsel, and I have moved probably a little faster than we were beginning to have the glazed eyes by the time we broke for lunch. So I did not really see any huge substantive changes right now in the rest of section C, which talks about the driver education schools. So I was ready to actually begin on page 41 with the minimum standards for operation of the licensed Texas driving safety schools and course providers, with an eye to this being sort of a high-level review until we get to the work groups, if that's still
Yes.
your goal.
Absolutely.
Ma'am, this is Carlos Rand.
Yes.
I know you wanna move forward, but I need to take us back just for 1 second.
Okay.
To that same page we've been looking at 15R, where there's a rule, we used to call it the Johnny B. Good rule, because it had to do with a driving school, it's called out. And that was P, was being struck out.
Mhm.
And I know you all are striking it out because you probably thought it was ridiculous. But normally, I have found that when someone writes a rule, it's because somebody's been violating that, okay? And that was written specifically because some students were being driven overnight and so forth. And that's, you know, not that I'm not in agreement with removing it, but I just would want to know if you knew why you removed that, just because of the language, because it doesn't look fun.
We didn't see anything in the statute, that's kind of where we go first, and it seemed, we figured there was somebody once that had done this, but it's, to me, to us, it was for study. Is it supposed to be a rule that, for everyone, and, you know, so it's, again, nothing is struck out forever, but just at our first blush, roll through the rules, it seemed strange, and it seemed like something that maybe one person had done once, but again, if it's something that's very, very important, it's certainly, nothing's written in stone here.
Thank you.
So,
Excuse me, can I ask you a question on page 22? Sure. There's a note at the top. It says replace. And I didn't look, I noticed it was on the number has. Is it, to replace the section C?
this was a note that when Brian and I were going through the rules, one of his notes, so I'm not exactly sure what we would replace it with, it was just a note for the work group. Do you remember, Brian?
And you know, I've got different page numbers, so I'm just trying to catch up to it. So what is the 84.10 what?
It is, very long section.
Yeah, it's a section for requirements for driver education instructor development courses.
84.106, courses of instruction, and it's like C, little letters, C.
Let's see.
It starts out, this subsection contains requirements for driver education instructor development courses.
Okay. So first I thought you said a little sweet from the commercial, the guy got the pepper, so you said a little C. It's very helpful. The replacement was on the subsections, and I'd asked Della just to be consistent in how we reference those. Throughout the rules, in some places it says subparagraph, paragraph, subchapter, subsection, subchapter, chapter, and I just wanted her to be aware that I wanted her to be consistent in the way that you do that. As we merged them, some of those terms were inconsistent.
Oh, thank you. I thought it was replace the whole section. So
No.
I'm just gonna go.
Why?
I know, cause we need that, okay. And on.
Pat, Lauren. On page 18R, Roman numeral number 3,
Required material?
since it made reference to the Texas Driver Handbook, will something be on the handbook that will show that the regulation is now under your department and not TEA, so will there be a correction there?
Sure. Are you on
I'm on,
required material?
yes,
A copy of the current edition
of the Texas handbook.
Texas Driver Handbook?
Yes, I'm saying in that handbook,
Or study material that is equivalent?
right, but my question is, in the handbook, when it refers to the regulation, so since we're having a move from TEA to this area, would there be a change in the handbook to make that reference?
Yes, ma'am.
It should be.
Okay.
Where it's appropriate, we'll definitely.
Yes, this is Francis Gomez. Yes, it should be.
And is that a TPS document?
It is. Right, Francis Gomez, yes.
United States on, I'm gonna get through these. So on 26R, it's section 107, for those that don't have some copy. B, as in boy 2. Can we strike that one, since they're signing a contract before our student has a driver's license?
Yeah.
Because we have it on the contract and it becomes quite confusing whose number goes in there, because it asks for the students, but they don't have one at that point.
We can sure put that down.
Thank you.
Kevin, now, page 18R. Four. Wondering why that's being taken.
Editing, because I believe that was,
I
should
mean,
be
it's
obvious.
common sense,
Yeah.
but. I think we ought to talk about it.
Okay.
Brian Cranston, Mr. Knapp, I think Nick raised a good point. This is one of those things that, should it be a rule or should it be a guideline? And the one thing you guys are gonna learn in our agency, if it's a rule with Christina's robust enforcement division, it becomes something that's enforced. A penalty assessed to, you're gonna go through the penalty matrix discussion, you're gonna say, okay, we charge them $25 or $500 because they didn't get it edited, and you're gonna realize, maybe that's a guideline. But that's where we're coming from.
Okay.
It's gonna be a great conversation to have.
Any more questions for the driver education section? Okay, page 41. And again, just because we're moving on doesn't mean it's not gonna ever be addressed again. So I apologize if I seem to be rushing you. I was just
Appreciate it.
trying to give, the overview, but we can certainly answer any questions that you want. If you'll notice in, on page 41 at the bottom where we begin, this licensed Texas driving safety schools and course provider, the definitions are struck only because they're gonna be relocated to their own section with all the other definitions ultimately. On page 48, where it talks about the administrative staff members, 84.205, that was struck because we no longer will be issuing the permits or licensing for the staff pursuant to the statute. Page 52.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
With regard to Carl's friend?
Uh-huh.
I know the statutorily directors were struck and is no longer enforceable. What are your plans to have people that can respond to a client's visit or inspection or something like that? Because I believe the language is trying to say owner or instructor, and in this industry, sometimes owner is neither, okay? I mean, if they're the owner, but they're not the instructor, they may be the owner, but they're not really involved in the business. They have the either administrative staff member or director, school director, actually taking care of it. And there are instructors that don't want to be in charge of the administrative side. So who are we going to have?
The language that I think generally is in there right now, and we see in other programs, is the owner or the owner's representative or the owner's designee. And then you can decide who that person's gonna be, when our person arrives on site and the owner's not here. So it could be the instructor or it could be the manager, the business manager, whoever you guys choose to designate.
Carl's saying, so there won't be really requirements for that designee that he has to fulfill?
Yes, sir, because when you look at the inspection requirements, when you boil it down to its final conclusion, it's the responsibility of that owner for whatever goes wrong, not that individual who's being their intermediary. That owner is gonna be held accountable for any violations that happen.
Okay.
Thank you.
On page 52, again, we took out the suspension, revocation, or denying a license. Very similar language to what was in the driver education portion. Because again, we'll be running it through our enforcement process. And then not a lot of changes, obviously, as we go through. And on page 59, and this is where I worked closely with Gay and Kathy, and I think, didn't we agree that G would come out because it just wasn't being done? Or the student course evaluation? I don't know how important y'all, obviously you feel about it, but we've taken from their experience, they felt like it wasn't being done anyway, so I have a rule that no one's gonna do if you feel like it's important.
Excuse me, David Bruce. Going back to page 53, 84207A. This goes back to Brian's point regarding definitions. Midway through that paragraph, this is not a highlighted change, but it says, any changes and updates to the course shall be submitted to the course provider and approved and so forth.
I'm sorry, what are you on?
Page 53R, 84207A.
A, okay.
I think we need to define the course, because in the past, sometimes relating to alternative delivery methods, the course has been deemed to be the website. Sometimes it's been deemed to be the course material. And again, to help everyone understand and follow the rules, we can just better define and more consistently define what course means. In that case, I think that would help the industry as a whole.
Okay.
I mean, this chair, actually, I see it as just a course, the specific course. You wanted to be specific on, say what?
Well, just in the past, some of the interpretation as far as the regulations, how they're enforced or maybe not enforced, it hasn't been always 100% clear, at least in my opinion, and from other people I've spoken to in the industry. So again, I just, with Ron's point, to go through and try to make these rules as clear as possible, I think that would be beneficial.
Given that, might I suggest just curriculum there?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I think what's been done is just flat out, they're just saying the course is supposed to be very specific to.
And the content.
Right.
of the curriculum.
So I understand what you're saying, because the way it's been divided before, but I think, I like it this way. It's, again, we can, of course, discuss it, but I like that word as well. So we'll look at that. Okay, thank you. Absolutely.
Not the same, on that same page, A1B, where it talks about, getting American Translator Association, National Association of Judicial Interpreters and Translators, or have a translator's credentials. Would want to propose that maybe we have, if somebody is their native language, could also be a translator, and not have to reach out to these other organizations if it's actually a person that it is their native language.
The same, we'll include that in the parking lot so that, whichever group works on this, they'll know that's a comment that you have. To add an alternative way of choosing the translation. Okay.
Thank you.
You have a question? Okay. Moving on, I'll be on page, I was on page 59, where we had talked about the student course evaluation. And again, the state level evaluation of the driving safety courses, again, I believe that was something that really just wasn't being done. I'm flipping through. You can see we left a lot of this alone for this first pass. Page 75, we just simply inserted the department's information in there, and C in the middle of the page, the website and all of that.
Excuse me, David Bruce, going back to page 70. B, examination, the course provider may allocate up to 90 seconds for the questions presented over the internet and 30 seconds over the telephone. Again, with a lot of experience, we've done 30 seconds over the telephone is not typically reasonable. There's typically an issue why someone needs some additional help. And when you're trying to adhere to the rules, it's really come across as, in my opinion, bad customer service. So I don't know the exact number to put in, but I'd like to at least put that on the table to think about.
Brian, I think there's a number of those elements that, in terms of calculating the number of minutes, 180 days equals a minute, that sort of thing, to take a fresh look at those. I think in one of the sections I read early on, that it listed maybe 4 or 5 components, but only 4 of them were identified a little bit later, so there's some opportunity to take a look at that. I think it's a great point. We know more than we did before.
Okay, moving on to, unless you have any further questions about the driving safety course providers, I'm on page 80R, subsection E, the minimum standards for operating the drug and alcohol driving awareness program. Again, you'll see that the definitions struck out and moved to their own subsection. On page 83, where it says notification of legal action, and this is pretty consistent through at the bottom of page 83.
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, Brian Francis. On Brian Francis's page 72R, it's gonna be different than others. It's 84.211, the cancellation and refund policy. Just again to point out things where they can and should be the same. When you look at letter B, the within 120 days, the effective date of termination, that is a different time frame than we have for the driver safety, just for the driver education. Just be aware that those are things we're going to be looking at, the time period for getting the refund. Also, when you look at letter C, in the driver education side, there are 3 last known addresses, and there are only 2 options here. Those will be the things that we're looking at just to create the consistency across programs where it could be and should be consistent.
Kind of saying, just the history on that is, because driver's education took more money from the students, they gave us more things to do. Then the base fee of $25 and up for the driving safety group. Didn't think that was as challenging as the amount charged for.
It's just having a standard,
Yeah, no,
yeah, you got that poverty
Agree,
line.
yes.
$25, I don't want you to have $25 of my money any longer than you're supposed to have it versus, $350 of my money, so. It's just about being consistent and efficient with the program.
We appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you. Ooh, y'all got some fees up in here. You're scooping it. We don't call fees at 11 day people. These fees should be in all caps, in bold, underlined. That's my statement on the list.
Brian, Carlos Fran, welcome to our world.
Yeah, I know. And Kukamuka is a word that I learned in my MBA program. It's a very technical term, it means, by golly, wow, that's amazing, can't believe it's in there. It's just interpreted for you. Those technical terms for you.
Page 83 at the bottom, this is an example of something that is probably important to you, but it's also something that really doesn't fit in with something the way we operate. So obviously we're gonna talk about it, but the notification of legal action, it's not in the statute, but it says the school shall notify the division director in writing of any legal action that's filed against the school within 5 working days after the owner or any school instructor has commenced the legal action or has been served with legal process. We thought that that was just so broad. It could be any sort of civil action, criminal, what are we gonna do with it? Just file it away? On our renewal process, we'll do criminal background checks, you know, and we depend on the complaint process. So that was something we felt was just additional level of bureaucracy for the schools and everybody to have to do, that we didn't really have a way or any statute that would allow us to deal with a school that is suing somebody or a school that's being sued in civil court, for example. So fodder for the work group, but that's why that was taken.
I'll explain that history. That's another one of those proprietary school rule carryovers.
Okay.
Brought up a long time ago. Had to deal with federal government monies, so they wanted to make sure the school was solvent and nothing was going on. That's what that's about.
Brian Francis, on my version of 82.R, 84.304.
Page 85.
85R, thank you very much. Letter A2. So you remember Christina Kaiser was up here doing a presentation about enforcement. She's going to challenge you guys with coming up with the penalty matrix for the different enforcement provisions. When you look at A2, that becomes one of those weird clumps. There are 2 different standards in it. One clearly says, holds a valid driver's license that hasn't been suspended, revoked, forfeited in the past 5 years for traffic-related violation. Boom, should be done. But then it throws in this murky, or is knowledgeable in the areas of traffic safety and alcohol. One doesn't have anything to do with the other. So when Christina does her cite and says, I'm going to charge you for section so-and-so violation, it has this odd, well, which piece are you doing? Those are things that you're going to want to decouple. You're going to break those out. The way they are completely different standards, they need to have a separate section so that people can know, as opposed to it being lost at the end of the sentence. Okay?
And the reason, I mean, it brings it to the discussion, and also in that section 84.304, where we've taken out is a good reputation. That is in the statute, and we might put that back in, but again, the good reputation is all taken into consideration when the person applies, whether they have the honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity pursuant to our overarching statute, and obviously pursuant to the criminal requirements in the law. So again, we're not saying a person doesn't need a good reputation. We believe that that standard will be taken care of through our normal process and through the law itself. Would require us to deny someone that had certain crimes. I'm on page 98. There was a whole subsection in there on commissioner's rules on hearings held under the Texas Education Code, chapter 1001. It is not a new subsection for you. It is something that we struck out of the rules. When the rules came over, it was here, but it's been taken out of 1001 Education Code, because again, we have our own hearing, we have our standard hearing process through the State Office of Administrative Hearings and and follow those rules. So that's why this was all taken out. It doesn't mean there's no hearings anymore. It just means that we will put contested cases in this program through the normal course of, we send out a notice of alleged violation, they have an opportunity to respond, settle, ask for a hearing, and then we go to the State Office of Administrative Hearings. So this whole procedure to schedule the hearing, continuances, all of that is really taken care of with SOA's rules.
Brian Francis, and Ms. Lark, earlier you had a question about how they're gonna know about the sanctions of administrative process. When Dell was referencing SOA with State Office of Administrative Hearings, in the letters that we send to the person who's coming at that letter saying you have an option to schedule a hearing or get into an agreed order with us, if they choose the hearing path, we also give them the steps and what they need to do, who they need to contact. So it's not like they have to find that in the blind. They're gonna be aware that that's an option they wanna exercise.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So on page 100, we go back to our new subchapter F, as in father. And we are on the parent talk. And I'll ask Carrie to come up and help if you have specific questions on the parent talk driver education program as we go through those rules. Thank you. Essentially, we brought these rules over pretty much intact from where they were with TPS. Plopped them into new section 84. And we have not made much or any changes to them. If the work, obviously when the work groups meet, we can take it from there. So they really only go a couple pages to 102. I didn't know if anybody had any questions on parent talk.
Kevin, if I do.
Uh-huh.
Let's look at, page 100R, B, 84, 500 D.
D, okay.
However, a student cannot transfer hours between parent talk program and commercial. It's happening right now, we need to change it.
Okay.
We at least need to take a look at that.
And that's one of those things that maybe because you were two different worlds
Yeah.
for so long or something.
I think so. I think this is the rule, but I think all of us know that I believe it's happening, so we might as well just take out the rules. And then the other thing, all 32 hours of classroom must be taught under one program. I think if we're all approved with our curriculum, it shouldn't matter whether if they take the first 6 hours online and decide they want to take the rest of it with the classroom or whatever, we're all approved. And so I think we ought to at least take a look at that, to be able to interchange.
Okay. On page 101, again, we just replaced, our website
Excuse me.
information. I'm sorry.
On that concept, Kevin, one of the issues originally was in transferring partial hours from parent taught to a licensed school, is those hours were not taught by a licensed instructor. You could transfer the whole packet because it was completed, the full 32, by the parent as the instructor. But when you transfer partial, and this could change, but just the history on it, is you transfer partial, then all those hours were not taught by a licensed instructor, which that is what falls under the driver education rules for a licensed school. They must be taught by a licensed instructor, so that's why that transfer was not allowed originally.
Kevin, thank goodness we're looking at open, clear pages now, clean pages.
That's good, that's good. That's really good points, and the statute's gonna govern that, but we can, put this in discussion, that's good stuff.
Yeah, those are exactly the efficiencies that we like to be able to do by bringing everybody together. So Parent taught right now is on page 102, unless you have some further questions about the parent taught program, or obviously when you get into the work groups, there's things you want to add, change.
May I ask, Carlos, may I ask a question, maybe of staff, those that know, on page 101H, where they talk about driving, and they talk about 7 hours with an instructor and 7 hours of observation in the presence of the instructor. Does it specify an observation of who? Does that mean they can observe the instructor, they can observe, with Broad Red School, it has to be observing another student receiving instruction. But with parent talk, well, there may not be another student in that group, so I've always wondered about that.
Yeah, very conscious. Because these were rules that were under parent talk, they were specific for parent talk, it was an implication, it was implied that it would, the instructor would be the parent, or basically it would be the parent talk instructor, that's who they would actually observe, would be the parent. Now that we are under one program, I think it would be good to maybe throw in some definition to include who you're instructing, and in the curriculum that's provided by a parent talk course, it tells you to have your student observe you doing this information, and that's across the board it's in our index, it's across the board as far as all parent talk courses are concerned. And so it's defined in the curriculum, but I think it, may be good for the breakout groups to look over that, to maybe throw in some additional clarification or definition for that, so I could see that.
I'm so glad we have the staff that can answer the questions, I would not know.
Not a second. And Carrie, didn't that change happen because Phillips put it in statute, the 7-7? Okay, thank you.
Page 102. This bringing of these rules over from CPA was a very interesting exercise for us because this was in another statute, section 29903, I think, of the Education Code, where it just says that we shall develop the POI courses for the public schools. The curriculum is what we understood it to be. But there was some confusion, I think, between some of the staff at TPA and us about which of those rules applied just to the curriculum, and which applied to the actual public school, and how they would teach it. And we don't have any jurisdiction or authority to tell anybody in a public school really what to do. We believed throughout the legislative session that our responsibility under this part would be to make sure that the POI was developed according to the statute and it was a viable course. And how they taught it, or who the teachers were, and how they were regulated was not really something that we would be involved in. So we kind of went back and forth with TA about which portions of these, there was a lot of rules to do with this, but which we would extricate and bring over here. So of all the sections, this particular one, G, might require some closer scrutiny because we brought over what we thought were the core requirements, which we thought would be appropriate for us here. And, let's see, which basically mirror what's in the statute. And then the procedures for the student certificates and transfers, we thought that would be appropriate. But there were several other subsections in that Title 19, Chapter 75, relating to the program of organized instruction that we just did not feel were appropriate for us to bring over and work with because we couldn't force it. So if you disagree, once we get into this part of it, we can certainly go bring, add new or whatever we may not have brought. Just because it's not here today doesn't mean we can't add it back in if we believe that it's something that should go with our responsibility to make sure the POI is taught. So it's not everything that was in that old 75. For those of you who dealt with that or were familiar with that. It's piecemeal. We brought over the two sections that we thought were appropriate, that we could enforce, so.
Excuse me, Kevin now. Brad, are you ready to get jazzed? Because I'd like to go back to page 100R. B is the board. Okay, so what I'd like to get is your take on TDLR And the ability for the state to have a course that is available that competes with all of us, all. Is there anywhere in TDLR that is allowed for a state agency to provide a course in competition with all the rest of the districts?
Great question. I've got a little background on the situation. Philosophically, my boss is against having the agency compete with the private sector. That's something that we've avoided doing. We have done it on a couple of occasions where we felt compelled to do it. One occasion was for elevator responsible party training. Could not get any provider to provide the training. These folks were not gonna be able to renew their license. So we put the course together so they could do it. We also did it once for the electrical program in terms of creating the 2-hour administrative law and rules course. We designed that course and put the curriculum out there online and said, please go for it and take it. But Kevin, to answer your question directly, that's not something that we jump into willingly and freely. I do know that there's been some situations in the past with the course that's been over there at ESC 13 or ESC 6, I can't remember which one. And that's not something that we are committed to doing long term. It's gonna be my boss's call, but philosophically, he is against us competing with the commercial sector, private sector.
Is that something that we'll kind of work through?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Honestly, Kevin, are you thinking to work through the 101 to go away? Is that the?
I didn't say that.
He did not say that.
I'm asking clarification. Okay, so you didn't say that, so.
All I-
Anything
So-
that would fall in that category is what he's referring to. Ooh, I
Okay,
felt
I'll just remain.
felt a rubber around the world.
No,
Yeah, everything's fair game to look at and have a conversation, no matter how historically people have been invested in processes. We're gonna look at it with a fresh eye, and our philosophy is gonna drive us. It's gonna guide us.
Okay, now I'm saying, can I ask another question that may not get an answer? So are we saying a political subdivision is a state agency?
No, we're not.
Or part of a state agency?
We are not saying that's a state agency. I mean, we're literally saying.
Because we have
either
two,
or.
it's just not, it's 101 and 106. They are both education service centers. Okay, I'm still confused, but I'm okay.
Kevin, but 106 has gone through the due process and 101 has not.
Not to say, they made me go through the due process, Kevin, I want you to know. Okay. All right, because I had to do it, so.
So we will have some more council on this one. We'll be stretching on this one.
I told you you could jazz.
I love it. I love it. Man, this is good stuff, y'all. Conversations that have not happened in open like this before. Now they are. Good stuff.
So the public school portion, whatever it ends up being, goes through page 109. Again, we didn't.
Excuse me, Carlos Benton here. I noticed on page 103 under the public section, 103B3, we have the language instruction shall not begin before 5 a.m. or after 11 p.m. But that was struck from our section.
Mr. Reno, they're all your sections. And this is one of those examples where we're definitely gonna want consistency.
We've been separate for so long.
Yeah. There's still references to division.
I'm just wondering why it's still in here, but it was taken out of the other one, and why it's not taken out here.
Because I didn't even know where to begin with this part.
I'll take that as an answer.
That's as honest as I can be. I didn't even know that we have the appropriate sections here. So I was hoping that the work groups could say, wow, you really need to go back into 75 and bring this over and not. So this was kind of abandoned in the end. I'm sorry about that. So that's the answer, honest answer.
Perfect answer, thank you.
Okay, page 109. To be consistent with all of our rule packages, rule writings, even though the advisory committee language is in the statute, we put it in our rules as well. As a general rule of thumb, we don't try to repeat everything that's in the statute in the rules. Not every definition, not every requirement. But in consistency with what we try to always have in our rules, the requirements and composition of the advisory committees are there. So I basically just cut and paste from the statute into the rule. It may not always end up being in this particular subsection, but this is exactly the language that's in this, within 1001. Okay, at the bottom of 109, relating to the fees, this is where, similar to the definitions, we combined the fees that we had into three little subgroups within subchapter I. So we started with the driver education schools, and then on page 110, the driving safety and course providers. And then on page 111, the alcohol, the TDAP, and then it goes through page 112.
I have a question, Carlos Reyna. On page 110 for driver education schools, under D, I believe it's 15, the late renewal fee is $200. But then if I look on page 111 for course providers, under C 15, that is struck, the $200 late fee is struck. I just was wondering.
That's an oversight on
Is
our
it?
part, yeah. Because,
Which one's going, which one's staying?
I don't know. At this time, I think the fees, well, right now, the fees are what they are. And so we go through this process.
Brian Francis, Mr. Raymond, you'll recall that there is a different category of late fee that's in your statute, and it's that I didn't file my application, within 30 days of the expiration date. That's referred to as a late fee. And then there's TLR's version of a late fee, which every other occupation has, that says if it's 0 to 90 days after the expiration, or 1 day after 90 days after expiration, it's X. If it's 91 days to 18 months, it's Y. And so there is some dueling terminology for a unique statutory provision for late fees, or who didn't get their application to us soon enough for the expiration date. I roll my eyes at that one. And then there is a traditional, standard, universal late fee provision. So we will have to reconcile those. Okay.
So, yeah, what the fees will be some of the things that we're, like, as Brian said, studying pretty closely. But right now, we're charging, the fees are what they are until we get changed. Then on page 112, subchapter J, and we can probably flesh that out a little bit at a later point when we understand what's in chapter 51 of the occupations code. But basically, we're directing everything to do with revocation, suspension, and denial, and the process, the hearing process, and all of that, within chapter 51 of the occupations code. If someone violates chapter 1001, the rules, or 51, which would be the two statutes and one set of rules that people under this umbrella program will be held. So, in a nutshell, unless you have some further questions, that's a high overview of what we did. I'm available to answer, obviously, any more questions.
Mr. Chairman, we've got 10 on revising the work group document. There's a few grammatical elements I want to remove from that. So she'll be bringing this back, and then I think we'll be able to see that next week for discussion.
John is saying, because some of us, Carlos, I'm not quite as old a dinosaur as he is, but I'm getting there. We made the transition in '89, and we never got this far in years. So I want to say thank you very much and appreciate the work you've done and put in and everybody that's contributed to it. Because I feel our voice is heard, and that's the first thing I'm going to tell you. Because we had to hammer some doors down previously to get it heard. And thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure,
Just
probably
begun.
about 10 minutes before she has it.
I'm thinking a quick little recess. Sorry, 10 minutes. Let's get started. Okay, Miguel Benavides, Chair, we're back in session. Where are we?
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good opportunity. You got a handout before you that you created regarding the work groups that are going to really do the yeoman's effort on this task here. As you're handing it out, you had shared with us that you wanted to have 5 members per each of these groups. And so right now, there's a vacant spot in the first 3, and there are 2 vacant spots. But I think you wanted to kind of lay out the groups and what your thought process is.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Ricardo Benavides, Chair, by the way. You know, just today, I think just looking and listening to everything, I wanted the board members obviously to hear everything, but I could feel it, and certainly I felt the same way. When we were hearing every line by line, I just felt that it would be important to just have the overview and then really concentrate on, because this is so important for all of us. Hearing Nina and Pat and Carlos and Kevin, everybody mentioning certain items that we'd like to touch on, and because of that, I really think it would be important to have these work groups. What I felt was, and there's 4 of them, by the way, board members. One of them deals with school and instructors. I felt that there was certain individuals, and this is my opinion. Keep in mind that I didn't want to keep anybody. I hope that I don't offend anybody by not including you there. I just felt that these were your niche, and I could be wrong, but I added on the school and instructors was 1 work group, and again, it'll be a work group that deals with the operations of the school, really keying in on the inspections that are going to be done, the license renewal requirements, standards of conduct. These are the individuals that I felt would be good in that work group. The second work group is on continuing ed, curriculum, and course providers. Again, as you can see, certain individuals that I really felt had the know-how. There's 5, there's room for 5 people. So there's obviously still room for 1 on that one, including the original one. The third group deals with enforcement and compliance. And again, some other people. Now, you'll notice that some people I threw in on more than 1 because you have just a wide range of experience. And then there's the last group there. It's the rule and alignment. It pretty much ties in all the work groups and activities. I'd like to say this. What I'd like to do is, of course, form these work groups and have us really dig in the information. And then what's going to happen is we're going to grab all this information, what we find out, and I'm assuming that it will be introduced, Brian, into the agenda?
Yes, sir. Well, every agenda from now on will have a segment where you see the staff reports. There's going to be another segment that says work group reports. And that's where the work group will say, here are the recommendations we've been working on for the last 2 months, the last month, here's our information. And then later on, there's going to be an agenda item which will deal with the rules that will flow into that effort. But there will be a standalone opportunity to discuss the work group recommendations on the agenda, get some back and forth. What do you guys think? I can't believe you went there. Oh, this is wonderful. Whatever you want to say about that. And then, so the efforts of the work group will always be transparent and out there for the group to have to digest.
Excellent. I really feel that by having these work groups, it allows us to slowly take our time and cover line by line. I think that's what we felt like doing today. But of course, we're restricted with time. So I guess if I can get started with work group number 1, dealing with schools and instructors. Now, I appointed, would like, of course, for Cindy to volunteer, Kevin, Carlos, and myself on that one. Is there anyone that feels, any of the board members here that feels that maybe you'd like to be a part of the first one? There is room for one more, and again, you can be in more than one work group. It would require, remember that these work groups are going to be meeting. We could have conference calls. We could do the go-to meeting. We could actually come back and hear. It is this small number of people, so that it's not a quorum.
May I ask 2 questions?
Sure, absolutely.
Carlos, Brian, maybe you can help. Are we limited with regards to noticing that there's 4 except for the last one? Are we needing to avoid a quorum if we're going to meet? Is that what it is?
Yes, sir, that's why, well, let me make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. The 4 work groups in themselves, if the chairman wanted, he could do 7 or 8 different work groups. That's the first question I thought you were asking. The second question is that 5 people in the membership, that's what they're limited to, because 6 becomes a quorum for an 11 member board. And that's why the 5 seats are.
I was just asking in case someone wanted to volunteer to be on another, would that push it to the
Yeah,
quorum?
well, and that's what the chairman's saying, that there's an opportunity for one more on work group 1, 2, and 3, and there's an opportunity for 2 more people on work group number 4. And he's going through each of those to see if people have interest in.
Absolutely, Ricardo Benavides, Chair. I actually did not put 5 on each one of these work groups because I deliberately did 4 because I figured maybe there would be somebody that wanted to participate. And I didn't want to leave anybody out.
Good plan.
That's really it. I really hope that you understand what I'm trying to do here. I wanted to have everybody participate, of course, and absolutely, Carlos, I want you to volunteer in more than one if you can. And certainly if you don't want to be in one of the work groups that I thought maybe you might be interested in, we could obviously change that around a little bit. So if we can get started with the first work group, I'd like to kind of get them done right now. Cynthia, how are you on the school and instructors? Would you like to be a part of that work group?
Absolutely.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Kevin.
Sir.
Thank you very much, Kevin.
Rick, would you like to be on there? I was just
Oh,
asking you a
thank you so
question.
much. That's terrible, but actually I had to think about it for a second.
Stick with me, man. It's,
I know.
it's nowhere near 11 hours.
That's right. Is there another board member that would like to participate in that work group on the first one? The school and instructors, anybody else that would like to volunteer? Again, it doesn't have to be 5. It could remain that way. Thank you so much. If you change your mind, by the way, please feel free to let me know. We just can't have any more than 5. The next one, the continuing ed curriculum and course providers, the approval standards, hours for continuing education. These are just examples of things that the work group is going to handle. Guidelines for alternative delivery courses, other educational matters. David Bruce, I really think that we'd love to have you on that one. How do you feel about that, by the way?
That'd be great.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate that. Francis?
Yes, and I would also like to nominate Carlos Reyna.
Excellent, thank you. And that takes that last.
I would also like to serve, so we're gonna have to vote.
Absolutely, we are definitely going to take a vote
Well,
on that.
actually, you
Sorry,
don't have to
Carlos.
vote. The chairman's gonna have to make a tough call.
This one was a
These
hard
work
one
group
for-
appointments are his calls, so, I told him that seat gets lukewarm and then the heat turns up a little bit, so.
This one was a tough one. Ricardo Benavides, Chair. This one was a tough one for me, and it's one of the reasons, again, why I left it open. But I could have filled it with 10 people, no question about that. We have 9, of course, that I wanted to look at that one, and certainly Blake. We have 6 people here, so.
This is Francis Gomez. I can move down to enforcement and compliance.
Fantastic, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Excellent, that leaves that vacancy there, perfect, so I will scratch Francis. And then, so that work group will be David, Nina, Blake, Carlos, and Kevin. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
Good, thank you so much. Any questions so far? Yes?
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir. Will any of us have a chance to weigh in on the other work groups matters?
All those matters are gonna come to you at the advisory board meeting, so because the work group is working on that specializing it, does not mean that you need to stop looking at it. you will always be able to weigh in on it, and at the end of the day, the final vote for should we include that or should we not is gonna come to the entire board.
Thank you so much, Brian, I
Right,
appreciate that. Ricardo?
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt, but Della was, just be careful to avoid the quorum issue. If there's 5 on the group, you know, the weighing in from the 6th person will need to be here and not talking to the people. That's just, it gets kind of complex and technical.
And along those lines, Tamla pointed out to me that, so let's say we've got the 5 members on the continuing education curriculum course provider work group. And Carlos is on the enforcement group. He can't go talk to that group about what the curriculum group did, because now you have to walk in court because he walked into one. So you've got to really be true to having those lines up, and that's something we're gonna expect of you guys. And the staff is gonna be there supporting you on the work groups. We'll be gathering the information for you that you need. We'll be coordinating the meetings and the dates and times for you. We will have staff available at the meetings. So you'll have a compliance person, enforcement person, education person, licensing person to be there. So you're not in this by yourself. We'll be working with you. But those are the things you've got to be mindful of.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Glenn, by the way. Absolutely, I just want to remind again that what we're doing is we are just dividing it into section, all this work and tasks that we have before us. We're dividing into little sections, what we can handle, and then we will all, no decisions will be made. We will all together, it'll be brought forward on the agenda, and then we can decide at that moment there. So great question, thank you. The third section that was created was the enforcement and compliance. Dealing with criminal conviction guidelines, the penalty matrix has not been established, so that's kind of important. Basically, all other enforcement matters. Carlos, you'd be perfect for this one. How do you feel about that? Excellent, thank you. Pat?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Nina?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I threw myself in there as I wanted to, of course, still participate. However, we still have one opening. Anybody would care to be a part of
Vice
it?
Chairman Francis Gomez took that spot and she moved.
Oh, that's right. I threw her the wrong one. My apologies. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Thank you. So that's it. That takes care of that one right there. And then we have that last one. This one here is it's a tie all work group. Basically anything that we might have left out. A lot of these are connected, and so we'll just pretty much have to just tie it all together. I wanted to be a part of that. However, I'll definitely remove myself if we just have a lot of participation. Pat, what would you consider doing that one? Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Glenn?
Sure.
I thought you'd be important on that one. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Anyone else that would like to participate in that fourth?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to vote.
Thank you, Kevin, so much. Appreciate that. I have one more spot.
Mr. Chairman, this is Blake Garrett. I just am curious how we can execute on this work group without creating a quorum.
It's a great question, and George just came over and talked to us as well about that. So what that group's gonna be looking at is really the outline. When you start working with Della on it, what are the sections and the captions gonna look like? We need to have these 5 captions here, we need to have these captions here. It'll also be looking across the board for consistency, so the 36 provision that was in there, that could come in there as well. It's gonna be delicate, but we'll be fine, because we'll make sure Della sits there in schools and rules and all that good stuff. But that one has some challenges. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you, so smart.
So it sounds like Blake might want to serve on that.
That's right. That's right. You speak up, you're in.
I would love to delicately serve on that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, make sure, I just want to put this out there. Glenn, did you have a desire to be on enforcement?
No, sir.
You good? Okay.
No, sir. Yes,
I thought I read your left eyebrow, I thought it went up.
No,
I went
it went up for the one above it, with the continuing ed curriculum.
Ah. Well, you
I
should-
knew that would be a popular one. Okay, anybody have any questions? Any of the board members have any questions about what we're trying to do here?
Mr. Chairman, there's still no a space on the first one, the school and the instructors? is that?
That is correct, it's still open, we have,
I would volunteer to be the.
thank you Lynn, so much, I really appreciate you volunteering, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, board members.
Pat, Mark, one point of clarification. If you're working in two groups and some information is in one group that may be applicable to the other group, so you're not seeing yourself as walking or sharing of information, that is not conflict, that's.
If you are working on the information in isolation, but if you are working on the information, we can say, well, when we talked about it in the other group, this is what we were thinking. You just walked it, but in terms of, if you're looking at that data raw and deciding how you want to move forward with it, that's one thing. But when you start saying, here's what we brought forward from the other meeting, we think we're gonna make that recommendation over there, you've walked it. But you're gonna have like subject matter.
Now, suppose you didn't use that terminology, you think it in your mind, I was in that other group and we talked about this.
I'm not gonna, we're not gonna give you a head,
Okay,
state
yeah,
is-
that was the point.
Yeah, the state is not appropriated as the telekinetic budget yet,
Yeah,
but we are seeking it.
Understood.
We're seeking it.
The
Those are
issue
great-
is to ask.
These are great questions, and it's sensitive, we wanna be sensitive to the work that you have to get
And
done.
gentlemen, was, the issue was really deliberation to get together. So, and what is considered deliberation could be email discussion or talking back and forth. So that's what we're really trying to avoid.
Okay.
Not so much the information, but the exchange of information or the deliberating outside of an open meeting.
Thank you so much, Ricardo Benavides, Chair. Yeah, I just want to mention, that's a great question, Pat. I want to make sure that we don't contact each other outside, whatever work group you're in. If you have any ideas, certainly bring them up on the next committee meeting. We can always put that on the agenda. If it's, of course, we can always vote on that or talk about that. I want to make sure we don't leave anything out because there's no question about it. I thought that these 4 work groups pretty much covered everything. I'm hoping I didn't leave anything out. Again, I want to thank you all so much. I'm going to get together with Delia and Tamara. I want to make sure that we kind of coordinate the time because we have a time frame, Brian. I believe it's February, mid-February. So I want to wait till after we're going to enjoy Thanksgiving holiday. And then we'll come back in December. I'd really like to have those work groups. And again, on the conference, phone call, we don't really actually have to be here. And we'll meet as much as we need to so we can go line by line and do those changes, really bring out those ideas. We'll have the time to do that, so it's kind of exciting. Again, thank you so much.
And the staff will reach out to you in your work group configurations. So you'll be getting an email from someone very shortly, probably with Christina, I know is gonna be taking command. She's pretty controlling in that regard, but taking command of the enforcement group, and she'll be reaching out to you as a work group, saying, so, I'm your person, and she'll probably send you copies of current criminal conviction guidelines we have for other agencies, other programs, as well as enforcement penalty matrices for other programs, and she'll coordinate that, and then we'll have probably Ray in charge of the continuing education one, and then Ray may have Carrie working on the schools. But you'll be contacted by us to do the contacts through your group so that you're not just jumping all over the place.
Excuse me, Chairman Kevin Mann. What are the possibilities of doing go-to or whatever? It's kind of tough from Amarillo to get down here every
Absolutely.
time.
They're very possible. So we've got smart board there. We have several smart boards throughout our agency. We've got conference calls. A number of these work groups, I remember Christina and I worked with one for the towing group, and one member was present and the rest were there on the conference call. And we were able to work it out because we had the same documents and we're reading from that. We'll make sure that we make it work for your schedules. But think about December and January being the work group work months. And so we don't expect you to have one meeting. You probably have 2, maybe 3 to get your feet wet. And then when you come back in February, there's product there that'll help us move forward.
Kevin, might I suggest that we, in each one of these groups, that we personally kind of put together thoughts in these, it's send them to either Christina or someone who can then package them together to kind of see what we're all thinking before.
Not a problem.
Can you do that?
Not a problem. Well, we're done with it. Absolutely.
Great.
Just make sure you send them directly to the staff member,
Right.
so that there's not a reply all and all this going on, just the appearance.
And at this point in time, you could send it to Tamla, and she'll coordinate that, and then Christina at some point will take over again.
And then I'm assuming, because we're still not a quorum, that we, as work group committee members, can see what all the other ones are thinking.
Yes. Very good.
Excellent. The next item is, item I, recommendation for, agenda items for the next week.
Mr. Chairman, let me just remind you, you said that you may want to reconsider going back to public comment. There may be some folks here that may want to.
Absolutely.
Share.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Matter of fact, we talked about so many items, I would like to provide that opportunity for public comment at this time. Do we have any forms? Did anybody fill out any forms? Anybody would like a question? Comment? Anything else? Bring it over. Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. We have a public comment right now. Tom Pennington. Excellent.
I'd like to thank the board for spending the time and putting out the effort to reorganize these rules and bring us under TDL&R. And I appreciate you all spending the time to do that. One thing that I would like to ask is that the board take into consideration that we have different programs of driver's education here, specifically talking about driver's ed, online parent-taught programs. We've got commercial schools, brick and mortar schools like myself, and then we have public school programs. And although we have different methods of delivery and we do different things, and so there will be some rules that are gonna have to be different because it's a different way of delivery, different method, but as much as possible, we need a fair, level playing field. As much as possible, have the same rules across the board, specifically for public school. Public school, we all compete against each other for business, and with public school, we want to make sure they have the same rules, they have the same oversight, they have to do the same things that we're doing, and not just a given ISD, but we're talking about, you know, whether it's Region 6 or wherever. Just have a fair playing field for everybody.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you so much. Moving on to item I, recommendation for agenda issues for next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, obviously, we're gonna have staff reports. We're gonna have a lot of work group report discussions. And we'll have an agenda item that is open for the rules so that we can start folding those into a common document that can be reviewed. We'll probably not have on the agenda for you to vote it for publication, because I think that will still be premature. I think that third meeting is the one where you guys are gonna be ready to put out there for the world to see, to get that work done. We may have Christina's group having criminal convictions for the board to approve, because those applications are coming in daily, to get your eyes on that. That may be something that may be a decision, recommendation that we're gonna need from the body. And those are the only items I could think of off the top of my head.
Pat Lord, one logistic question. Is it possible to get this document in a Word file? Sometimes as you're working with it and you want to cut and paste it, and especially as you begin to see repetition, you can color code it, and that's just a way just to help us. So if we could get the document of all the rules in a Word file.
Yes, ma'am.
Excellent.
Brian?
Yes, sir.
Like Garrett, I have a question for you just as far as procedure. So I've had a few conversations with different owners of driving schools, and they voiced just some concerns, like similar to the open comments that were made. I've instructed them that the best thing would be to reach out to Tamla and you all. I don't know if that happens or not. So I have the knowledge of these conversations, and I don't know if that type of knowledge needs to turn into an agenda item, go to a work group, for discussion, whichever one it might well, if I so happen to be on that work group, what would you suggest as we do want to reach out and develop relationships so we know what everyone that we represent thinks? What do we do with that information?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's going to come in different forms. I mean, sometimes the questions are administrative. How do I get X done? And it's done, and we answer it, and we go from there. Sometimes it's strategic. They got a problem with the statutory change. That's something that's going to be long term. And then sometimes it's a philosophical piece that you guys need to hear about. When we get the rules at that third meeting, when they're published for that 30-day comment period, all of the comments that come in are going to come back to this body after that 30-day period. And that's going to be probably the best vehicle for us to have a very focused presentation of what people's concerns are. The other thing that our agency does is that we do strategic planning. And you guys are going to experience this. We go around to a lot of cities and we say, come out and tell us, what do you think we can do better? What do we do? What can we do well? What can we do better? What do we do well? And then if you can make one change in the way that we do business, what would that change be? That's going to be another vehicle for the industry to touch us directly. Bill's out there, I'm out there, having those conversations. And we always include an agenda item for the advisory board to say, here's what we gathered from the world out there at our strategic planning discussion. So there's a lot of avenues by which people can plug in. But I think sending them the TAM first is the best start, because when she gets the call, she's like, this is a gay question. This goes to Ray and his group. And we try to get it done for the person. And then if we find out it's a repeat question, then we develop an FAQ for it and give the people one answer so we don't have to keep answering. Does that help?
It does, Garrett, the open forums, is that broadcast through the same email list? Is that?
It is.
Okay.
It is. When we do it for all of our programs. And it's usually a 2-day thing. So we went to Harlingen. I was in Harlingen, Bill was in Dallas. I was in Houston, Bill was in San Antonio, or Amarillo, or Midland. And we're going to be out there this day. And we have 2 sessions for towing VSF. And they come out for their group, and then we have a session for driver's training, and we'll do it for bar and cause. I got a feeling we're gonna be out there for a week now with all these new programs. But it just allows the people to reach us and really have a very straightforward conversation about what's gonna happen in the industry. And it's gonna be another new piece that you guys have never had, to really talk to the guys at the top and say, you guys suck, or you guys are great, or man, if I were king or queen for a day, if you just changed that rule, my life would be better. And it helps us target and focus our efforts. That's another word for my MBA program.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, the next item is discussion on time, date and time for our next. What do we have? I think it's in February.
February, have the date out for you.
Yes.
She's good.
Thursday, February the 25th, or Monday, the 29th.
It's February the 15th. That's a Thursday.
25th.
My apologies. Thank you. I'm sorry. I can't hear.
I'm not on mic.
So it's February the 25th. That's a Thursday. And what was the one more day?
Monday, the 29th.
Oh. I love Thursday. I like Mondays, I think for everybody in the industry, it's our busiest day of the week. So I guess we could take a vote unless,
If you guys want to choose between Thursdays, I can offer March 3rd.
and that's another Thursday as well?
Yes.
Cindy's.
Okay. Well, how's everyone with February the 25th?
Chairman, works for me, yes.
Excellent. So I think we're all in agreement.
Sounds good.
Our next meeting, anybody want to move on that? Excellent. Second?
Is the 9 a.m. start time work for everyone?
9 a.m. is perfect.
David, you want 10 o'clock or had a little reaction?
No, that's okay. 5 a.m. driving from Houston's great.
Hey, flying from Logan Ford, it's awesome.
You beat the traffic, so that's fine.
Have the coffee pot ready.
Yes, ma'am, we will.
You have your chauffeur, Cindy.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any more questions? Anybody have any questions?
Our next item is adjournment.
Mr. Chairman, before you do, I thought this was a fantastic first meeting. And I think the industry is gonna be well served to have you guys out here, doing the work, and we're glad that we get to let our sleeves down and let y'all actually roll your sleeves up and do the hard work for us now. And thank you guys so much.
Would it be a violation of the open records of meetings that if we were to talk between groups and each of us had talked the rule prohibiting that ugly sit on council?
Like I told one of the advisory boards earlier this week, and the change I wasn't gonna do, I said, we'll take that under advisement.
Can we have a motion to, I'm sorry, are we done?
I'm ready to adjourn.
The meeting adjourned, excellent, can we second that? Second. We are adjourned.